Yeah. Hello, hello, hi. Shalom, 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 Sabbath shalom to you all. Today we are
Shavuot
going
Tov.
to Shabbat. Welcome to Kol Horeb, Sounds of Horeb. Today we have a fantastic, questions that we have in front of you. And we have our wonderful rabbi with us today. And without any further ado, we're going to jump into the questions because these questions are really going to be, you're going to like these questions. Really, these questions are really nice, mind-boggling question. Hopefully, Rabbi is ready for this one.
I don't know what you're going to ask, so let's hear it. Throw it on.
I don't leak out the questions before you come to the show.
You, not always. You've had 2 weeks of contemplation. What did you come up with?
All right, so yeah, how are you? How was your last week that you were sick? Are you okay?
Baruch Hashem, Akol Beseder. Everything's good. Praise the Lord.
Fantastic, fantastic. Baruch Hashem. So, but anyway, for as we are continuing to explore the you know uh, why Judaism, why we are why we have to follow monotheistic Judaism, one God, one temple, one Torah, one way, one worship, one tabernacle, and one temple. Why should we do that? I mean, that was the topic that we have been going through for all these weeks. And in continuation of that, we're going to get some more interesting questions today. And shall we begin?
Yallah.
Here you go. My fist comes to you. Ah!
There, you gotta go the other way.
There you go. You go
There
like
we
this.
go.
There you
Why is
go.
mine whiter than yours, but then the digital form looks yellow?
I know because that's how Judaism invites all the Gentile people into that.
Good
There's
answer.
there's no color, nothing. So see how it
It's just
men's.
skin deep. I'm white on the inside, chocolate on the. I'm sorry, the other. I'm white on the outside, chocolate on the inside.
Oh my God! All right, Rabbi. There
You're
is a
vanilla.
one.
It looks like.
Yes, sir. So let's go and see this one. See in Hinduism, I think last time I told you or not. Hinduism is mainly, I think, I would always refer to you all the time because it has got a lot of things which are related to even Judaism, like mystic, Kabbalah, everything inside the Hinduism. And in Hinduism, there are four books, like four main core books: Yajur, Rik, Ajur, Adharvana, and Sama. These are the biblical books. It's like the Torah for them. And then there are some other books which can explain those books. And then there are some other stories written for them to explain those Vedas, all these, holy books. And then also they played some of the other stories, and then they made, on the countryside, they were playing some skits, like a drama on the stage or something. They do the one. So there are a lot of metaphors in those things relating to that. So why I am telling all these things to you, even though you are a Jewish rabbi, why should you know all these things? But I want to ask you a question. So is Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and the
Don't do it.
snake are
Don't do
all.
it.
No, no, no. I'm asking you, are these metaphorically explained or really happened? How we are going to correlate this?
I love this. I love this topic. But you're treading on. Ooh, what's the word? You're treading on shaky ground here. We could we could offend a lot of people.
Oh no!
So
Okay.
so
I
how
don't.
dare you ask this very important question? All right, let's
Oh
do
my
it.
God.
It's an important question. It shouldn't be brushed under the rug.
Sure.
Um,
Yes.
And I think it's very important because you see a lot of ostracism of different groups within the Judeo-Christian world, let's say, based on this particular question or closely related topics. So I'm going to approach this uh, before answering you directly. I'm going to first state that I want to ask you a question. What if you could give the broadest command, the most broad command, all-encompassing commandment that we are commanded to do in the Torah, in the Bible? If you could summarize it in one command, what would it be?
What it would be?
There's not necessarily a right or wrong question. I just want to see what comes to
Because
your mind.
yeah, because you are trying to compromise everything in one. So I would say, um, I am your God. There is no other God under the sun.
Okay. Okay. And basically everything falls underneath that.
Yes.
I'd more or less agree with that. You could phrase it in a few different ways. Keep the will of the one God, do his commandments, the commandments of the one God, and don't do, idolatry. It's basically the same idea. Okay. If we then look at what the Bible or the Torah, whether you're limiting it to the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, or whether you're limiting it to the entire Torah, to the entire Bible. If we look at the commands in the Bible, there's not a single place where it commands you to take every single word and interpret it in a specific way. All right, when it comes to non-commandments, there's no command that says take the non-commandment parts of the Bible and you have to understand it only in this way. And if you don't understand it in way X or way Z or way Y, however, because many things can be interpreted in more than one way and are, right? There is no commandment anywhere in the Torah, anywhere in the Bible, where it says there is only one acceptable way to understand any particular, let's say, non-legal part of the Bible. It doesn't exist. What do we have, though, instead? We do have a commandment that says, don't add to my commandments and don't take away from my commandments. Adding to God's commandments is just as severe a violation of God's will and word as taking away from it. In the religious world, it's very easy to point fingers and say, "Oh, this particular group, they've abandoned the commandments of God, but we're strongly keeping them because we're holy. We close the top button of our shirts, even though there is no explicit command stating that, right?"
Yeah.
They forget that adding to God's commandments is just as bad as taking away from them. Okay? And when that, we are in fact taking away from his commandments because the command to not add is one of the commandments. So, what I'm getting at with regard to your question, right? And I think it's very important to touch on this before getting to it, is that God, number one, did not give us an explicit explanation of these stories. It's not there. Two, already in ancient Jewish literature, you see indications of more than one way of understanding these stories. Three, in the Torah itself, it says that when you have matters of controversy in your gates, ben din ledin, ben dam ladam, whether it's matters of adjudication, of matters of blood, matters of controversy in your gates, what should you do? You should go up to the place that the Lord your God chooses. Okay? And there you shall go to the priest, the Levite, to the judge, and the place that the Lord your God chose. And you shall do according to all that they instruct you to do. All right? There's not a single place in all of historical records of Jewish understanding of the Torah where even that Jewish legal system, what we call the Beth Din Gadol, the Great Sanhedrin, there's not a single place where they said you are obligated to understand the story of Adam and Eve the creation story in this specific way, XYZ, whether uh, that you have to understand it literally or that you have to understand it metaphorically. They didn't say either of those, right? Not nowhere in Jewish literature. And in fact, to add to this, the early approach of the greatest of Jewish leaders, Talmudic scholars, after the Talmud had been compiled, and for our listeners who might not know what the Talmud is, the Talmud is the only it's the only widely encompassing Jewish literature from ancient times that touches on the wide spectrum of topics in Torah and in Judaism in keeping God's commandments. Right? It's the only extensive record we have of ancient Jewish understanding of the Bible and the commandments of God. All right. Nowhere in there did they say you have to understand this story in this particular way or this particular way, literally or metaphorically. And if you don't understand it in way X, Y, or Z, then you are a sinner, or then you should be excommunicated. Nowhere. There's no such command. You can say that because there are halachot, there are laws regarding writing a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll, that someone who says this story, whether it's figurative, metaphorical, or literal, someone who says a story should not be in the Torah, that's a whole different topic. But how you understand is different. Okay, so when it comes to whether it's the story of Adam and Eve or any story later on in the Bible that's not a clear command, it's like a narrative or some kind of a story, the greatest scholars of the Jewish people have stated that when it comes to these things, you're under no legal obligation in the Torah of God to understand it according to any one particular interpretation. So long as whatever interpretation you have, so long as that interpretation does not lead you to abandon the Torah, does not cause you to violate God's commandments, you're essentially not guilty of violating any of God's commandments, right? And this is whether or not your understanding of that passage is objectively right or wrong. It could be that you have the wrong understanding of the story, perhaps. But as long as your wrong understanding of the story does not make you violate God's commandments, then you're not sinning. It is possible to unintentionally have an incorrect opinion without it being a sin. You know, people have different opinions about matters of politics or matters of science all the time, matters of medicine, matters about, you know, disagreements about what happened in our childhood, and you and your sisters and brothers disagree on that. The fact that you disagree on what happened in your childhood, you know, it doesn't mean that you're sinning for, you know, just for having the wrong opinion, even if it's actually the wrong opinion. You know, the Torah doesn't require us, God does not require us to have an absolutely perfect knowledge of everything. So when you ask this question, the average rabbi, sadly in our days, it's not everyone, but the average rabbi would probably either give you several different opinions, but if it's in the Haredi world, they would probably go with a more literal understanding, while at the same time saying that there may be some figurative or metaphorical meanings in addition to the literal meaning. And then there are other rabbis, like I said, give you several different opinions, and they would try to skirt the issue. Like they wouldn't really want to give you what their actual opinion is because they're probably afraid of what the reaction would be. So I'm going to tell you that there's indication of both opinions in ancient Jewish literature, both both opinions that at least look like they may have taken it literally, at least some elements of the story literally, and there are opinions that definitely would give basis to early Jewish understanding of Adam and Eve's story as being metaphorical. You have you have a foundation to stand on for both approaches in historical Jewish literature. And again, that doesn't mean that either one is 100% right or wrong. It could be that one is right and one is wrong, right? So if you're asking me what the, we basically need to rephrase the question. We need to ask what is, either we could ask what is the mainstream Jewish opinion about this story, or we could ask what do the majority of Jews think? What do the majority of specifically traditional Jews think? What do the majority of ultra Orthodox Jews think? And you could ask, what do I personally think? Or what did Rabbi XYZ think about this? Right? Um, so, which would you like to know?
Well, you
Because my
can.
opinion is not necessarily what most people would say.
Yeah, I mean, I have, while you're talking, there are a lot of questions, just kind of coming to me, but I'm not going to answer right now. But I would like you tell me, I understand what you told right now, or
Okay.
do you think that is it good to tell what the Orthodox rabbis thinks, what the contemporary rabbi thinks, or other, just a gist of it, like it's a little bit of a little touch. You don't have to
Okay.
go in depth.
Okay. Pretty much all educated Jews, not just people who know a little bit of Hebrew but haven't extensively become extensively familiar with classical Jewish literature, but pretty much any rabbi who is well acquainted with traditional Jewish literature will acknowledge that there is most definitely deep meaning in the story beyond a literalist reading. Pretty much all scholars in Judaism of any section of the Jewish world would agree with that. Usually, it's going to be more in the ultra Orthodox world, what they call black hat or Haredi, that are more likely and generally going to take it literally as well as figuratively. But they don't only take it literally. They think, in addition to it being literal, there is very, very deep meaning in this story, far beyond just the literal story, that teach extremely deep and significant principles, both for this world and our everyday life, as well as metaphysical concepts. So they treat it with far more holiness even than the average Christian does. I, I, I would say that the average Christian either kind of, if we're talking about evangelical Christians, uh, I'm not saying that they would deny that it has deeper meaning, but the tendency is to pretty much take it at a very literal level. And then less evangelical type Christians. I'm not speaking about Catholics or Greek Orthodox, those types, but what they call mainline Protestants. They're more likely to just kind of dismiss it as an early Jewish or Israelite myth that somehow made it into the text, right? So the Jewish approach is different from both. We give we give very deep meaning to this story, and I I think that that is the most important part of it, whether or not it's literal, to look at the meaning. And when you read this story in Hebrew, it's undeniable how extremely deep this story is. I really feel sorry for anyone who either totally discounts this story because they find it so uh, mythological, like talking serpents and stuff. They just throw it out the window. I feel sorry for that type of people, and I also feel sorry for people who take it literally and don't. In addition to taking it literally, right? The problem is not that they take it literally, but I also feel sorry for the people who take it literally and just kind of leave it at that, and they don't see the extreme depth in it. But I don't blame them because these people usually don't value the original language. You read it in Hebrew, your eyes will be like wide open at the symbolism here and scratching your head saying, this is not a coincidence. Whoever wrote this knew that there's a seeming contradiction between chapter 1 and chapter 2. That's what a lot of secularists like to point out and laugh at. Secularists who have never read the story in the original language, mind you, yet they are authorities. Some of them even have PhDs and they can't read the first chapter. Um, I'll just give you a few examples. One of the most widely known details of the story is that Adam and Eve were naked, and that there was a talking serpent who was clever or cunning. What you miss is that the verse where it says that the serpent was cunning and the verse that says that Adam and Eve were naked are literally side by side, immediately, one after another. One after another. You read that, you don't see any particular connection between these two verses. But you read it in Hebrew, the verse where it says the serpent was cunning, the word for cunning there is arum. Go to the next verse. Adam and Eve were naked. The word for naked there is arum. Same exact word, same exact spelling. Whoever wrote those two verses right next to each other knew that he was making a connection between the cunningness, the cleverness of the serpent, and the nakedness of Adam and Eve. There's no way he didn't see that connection and intentionally put it there, right? You read it in English or any other non-Hebrew language, you're going to completely miss this. That's just one of many things that'll make you scratch your head. Horeb, when they're kicked out of the garden, what is the last thing it says about the garden? This podcast is called Kol Horeb, right? Kol Horeb,
Yes.
right? Okay, so there's a verse where it says the voice of the Lord was going about the garden. The word for voice there is kol. It's the same as sound.
Sound, yeah.
Sound and the same word in Hebrew, unlike English. Then you have the story ends, right? The story ends with what did God put at the entrance to Eden after man left?
Or he put the gods or something. He put the
Yeah.
yeah,
He
right.
put cherubim,
Mm-hmm.
cherubs, and we have to try not to think about little baby
They,
cherubs
yeah.
that you see in European art. We don't know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what those are, but that's a whole different topic. It's very interesting, but a whole different topic. But it says that God placed cherubs at the entrance to the garden, uh, and a fiery revolving sword. Why? To guard the way to the tree of life. Okay. What is called the tree of life later on in the Bible? The Torah. The word
The
of the Lord
word,
is the
yeah,
tree of
yeah. The word of the yeah.
life. Right. And okay, so the tree of life is the Torah, God's guidance, life-giving guidance. How do you say sword in Hebrew? In Hebrew,
Sword.
sword, a knife, strong
I know.
knife.
Tell me. Go ahead.
Harib, harib.
Okay.
It's the same exact word, same exact spelling as Horeb.
Oh, okay.
It's the gate
Call
to the
Horeb.
tree of
Call Horeb. Okay. Got that point. Yes.
it's the gate to the tree of life, right? And also it says it was revolving. The word revolving is mitapech. Okay, mitapech. This means turning like this. It's also reasonably so. It's the modern Hebrew word for revolution, something that makes an upheaval. It changes things, makes things back different from how they were before. If something was like this, you revolve it, and now it's like this, turned it on its face. And that's what the Torah does. It takes a death obsessed culture, which was spreading destruction among humanity, and it flips it on its face. The Torah is known for being basically silent about an afterlife, whereas all the cultures around the ancient Israelites were obsessed with afterlife. They were obsessed with it to the point that they neglected basic dignity and compassion for people around them in this life. So the Torah is basically void about uh, details about the afterlife. This is about as deep as we get, but it also sets the foundation. Okay, long story short, my personal opinion about Adam and Eve, this is just my personal opinion, is that it's both metaphorical and literal, but that the idea that it's literal does not mean that the Adam and Eve in the genealogical record of, like Noah and so forth, does not mean that Adam and Eve is literally the first biologically, anatomically human individual. So my personal belief is that the story is mostly metaphorical, but that's not empty. It's very real. Very often, principles are more real than even like our own physical bodies. Our bodies die and change. Certain principles, one plus one has been true. That principle has been true before humans even existed, before we were even aware to think about it. We kind of discovered it, but it was always true. That's a principle. The story of Adam and Eve, in my opinion, is overwhelmingly metaphorical for eternal truths and setting the foundation for the rest of the Torah. Certain concepts that people think aren't really touched on in the Torah, but I would say they are touched on at the very beginning. And people just miss it because they miss it because they don't see the depth of the story. They're just looking at the face value literal teaching. So again, I do think it's literal, but I don't think that I think that the individual Adam and Eve uh, represent probably historical people, but I personally do not think that they are the first anatomical humans, physically humans. But then you can ask the question, is a human really a human if they are void of moral principles? If we're so degenerate that there's not much that distinguishes us between ourselves and the animals. If we don't have self control and morals, we're basically just highly developed animals, a lot more capability. You look at what the Nazis did to Jews and even non Jews during the Holocaust. It didn't matter how much intelligence they had. There are non human animals that have far more intelligence than humans do in certain areas of intelligence. Intelligence is not black or white. There are different types of intelligence. There's memory intelligence. There's spatial intelligence. There's artistic intelligence. Chimpanzees have incredibly more advanced short-term memory than humans do. There's tests you can study on. You can look up on YouTube, see it with your own eyes. They can memorize like in an instant a whole pattern that humans can't do. We are not special because of our intelligence per se, right? If chimpanzees had I forget the term. There's a word for. I don't want to waste time trying to think about the term,
Yeah,
but
let's swing back. Yeah, go ahead.
humans are unique from other apes in that we have a thumb that can do this, right? Most of them can't. Their thumbs are too far down. It's possible that if they had hands similar to us, they could do a lot more than what they currently do. If they could speak, they can maybe do a lot more than they currently can do because they could communicate with each other better, but they're limited. What what distinguishes us from animals is not our intelligence, it's our self-control and our ability to reason and to be intellectually honest, to set a goal. And if we the moment that we abandon that or haven't developed that, we're no different from animals. So I'm getting at the point that in a way, even if humans existed before Adam and Eve, in my personal understanding, even if humans existed before Adam and Eve anatomically with physical bodies, I think that Adam and Eve represent the point at which humanity was born as humans, where we stepped beyond just being an advanced animal, you know, and we awoke to the image of God. The image of God was breathed into us, so to speak, right? And that was at the point at which we became morally aware. We embraced timeless principles at that point. And I'd say that was the beginning of the civilization of humanity, not just with intelligence, but with morals and principles that will bring improvement to the chaos in this world. Maybe there were individuals before then that had done this, but they died off. They didn't succeed to spread it. So it could be that Adam and Eve were simply the first that helped get the ball rolling to spread morality and elevate humanity to the image of God. Go ahead. I know you have all kinds of questions.
No, no. If you're going to open that topic of maybe somebody before, then it's going to be like a totally different thing. People will be getting confused. Like we only be reading this Adam and Eve for this long now, Now this is a new statement coming there. Maybe sometimes you never know somebody was there.
All
So
speculative. We
yeah,
should not
so
waste time. We shouldn't waste time with speculation.
yeah,
And
yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I understand that now what I'm seeing from your answer is this: you were searching everything in the Torah, what Torah says. Does it talks about the event? Does it not talks about the event? And so everything,
I don't know what word
um,
you said. Does it talk
I'm an
about what?
event or the incident or the event, Adam
Okay.
and Eve. So you were trying to get the, check it with the Torah, what Torah talks about that. So you, for anything, for everything, going back to Torah. That's all basically, right? So question is this: do you think that Torah can cover every problems, everything, any doubts or everything could be easily cleared by Torah? Is it like that's the only answer?
I say the Torah gives the principles to solve problems, the basic principles. It doesn't give an explicit answer. And in fact, I would say that a person who claims that the Torah itself, the text that we have, literally directly gives us the answer to all problems in a very direct way. And we're not talking about a general answer. Yes, of course, the Torah gives a general answer. That's called a principle. But you're asking about specific answers to everything. I think that's absurd. Not only do I think it's absurd, but I think that it, only someone who's not familiar with the Torah and not honest can think that. Because among the commandments of the Torah are the commands to go to the Kohen, to the priest, the Levite, and the judge who would be in the place that the Lord would choose, to clarify matters of controversy. That is the Torah itself admitting that you have to go somewhere else outside of the text to get answers to certain things. So I would say absolutely the Torah contains the principles for solving all problems, the principles, but not the details. And it would be irrational of God to give a book that covers all solutions in detail for all answers and expect us to actually be able to live up to that. I mean, the Torah is already a pretty big book as it is. It would literally have to be infinite in size to solve all problems. It would have to be as big as there are potential problems in the universe, and that's ridiculous. And some people do kind of have this view, but I'm sorry, but I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's
Yeah,
contrary to the Torah.
yeah. The why I threw the question because people definitely would ask you, when you go to the governments across the globe, every government has 50,000 laws in this government, 100,000 laws in that government. In spite of those laws, still they face a lot of issues, a lot of problems are still hanging around there. Even then,
Sometimes the more laws you have, the more complicated it gets. Sometimes
yeah,
you try to do a good thing and make it better, but you end up making it worse. Many times
yeah.
simplicity is better.
So that's why I asked the question that because how come is it going to be possible for 613 to go and approach for every issue with that?
They're just
So that,
principles
yeah, okay, okay,
that can be applied in all sorts of different situations.
okay,
God
okay.
wants us to use wisdom. A fundamental of Torah and a very core principle of Jewish tradition is that proper Torah observance requires utilization both of the text of the Torah, historical Jewish tradition, and reason, intellect. If you divorce intellect or historical Jewish tradition from the text, you're corrupting the text. Maybe not literally with a pen or eraser, but you're not going to apply the text the way the text is intended to be applied. Reason has to go with Torah. They go together.
So, all right, moving on to the question number two. This is going to be a little bit bigger question also because I have a couple of smaller ones. I'll keep it in the end. But this one, a little bit, maybe you can take a little bit time to explain this one. We talked about this one because when we have, there are monotheistic religions, there are, polytheistic religions in the world. Sometimes they have some kind of, the image gods. In Hinduism, they have multi-million images. It's all individual thought process, however he feels the energy out there, and he shapes it. When he dies, the shape dies. That's the concept of Hinduism. That's why they have different images in Hinduism. So anybody could make anything. So, what is God in Judaism? Does he have an image, or how would you present? Because when Moses talked, called Horeb, he heard the sound, lightning,
Mm-hmm.
and we cannot we can't you know contain him in a small shape or anything. It's going to be difficult. So
It's
how?
impossible. Not difficult. It's impossible.
I'm sorry, it is impossible. Yes, I'm sorry for the wording. So
No,
it is,
just
yeah, it is impossible. So how would, because it always refers like he heard, he saw, he's seeing. So it's kind of there are some organs there to operate.
hmm
You know what I'm saying? So
yes. These are
how?
called anthropomorphisms.
Yes. So how do you describe that in a God in a Jewish way?
Okay, the Torah assumes that one learning it will not be learning the Torah in a bubble all by himself. That he just picks up the book at a bookstore in a translation, reads it at home by himself, and has no guidance. The Torah assumes that a person learning it is going to learn it with the guidance of scholars who have already become intensively familiar with the text and in the original language. And I think the fact that most people who think they have learned the Torah or the Bible, most who think they've learned it, did not learn with the scholar and did not learn in the original language. This has done more damage to the name of the Bible or the Torah than anything else. And it's led people to do all kinds of terrible things in the name of the Bible that the Bible doesn't even say to do. Ridiculous stuff. Um, and this is one such topic that's related to that. It's more clear in the original language that these references to God having a hand, to having a face, and so forth, it's more clear in the original language that these are figures of speech than it may be in translations. In Hebrew, many things have faces that everybody knows doesn't have a face. In Hebrew, when it says that the Spirit of God, I'm just going to use a popularly familiar translation of the verse in Genesis 1. When it says that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters, and the Hebrew literally says al pene hamoyim, over the faces of the waters. Okay, forget faces. I didn't know that water even has one face, but apparently it has many faces. It often talks about things being spread over the face of the earth. And every time it says face, it it's usually, I mean, I don't know a single instance when it's not plural. It's pretty much always plural. So
It's
face number one,
it's
go ahead.
Face or Phase, face or faces.
FACE.
Okay,
I
I'm just
think I missed
going.
something.
All right.
Okay, so similarly with the word yad, the word hand or arm, this word is obviously being used figuratively in many places in Hebrew. Uh, to give a quick example, anyone familiar with the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, they know it's called the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. Yad Vashem, hand and name. Here, the expression Yad, it's a figure of speech for memory. In other places, it's a figure of speech for strength. And this is very clear because you also have places where God refers back to his delivering the people of Israel out of Egypt with his strong arm. She asiti. Asiti means which I made. It, and this gets lost in translation. If this arm is a literal arm that belongs to God, like God is literally a body, he's not going to say the strong arm that I made when I took you out of Egypt, right? Or the strong arm that I did. You could translate it either way, did or made. But the point is, it's not something inherent to the being of God. It's something he did at that point in time, not like a limb that's attached to his body. If it's attached to his body, he doesn't say, I made a strong arm. And what? Does he only have one arm? Right? Why is it singular? And many times when it refers to the eye of Hashem, it doesn't say eyes, it says eye. So what, he only has one eye but many faces? It becomes silly. There's a passage where it says the eyes of the Lord run to and fro on the earth. There it's plural, and it says they're running around the earth. Well, I don't know about you, but I've never seen like a big eye going around the earth. Like, maybe it's there. I'm blind. I don't know. I haven't seen it. But
American dollar has a big eye.
yes,
it,
but
it
these
goes
are
around.
very,
It goes around the world.
yes, but these are very I hate to say, but these are very infantile ways of understanding the Bible. And not only the Bible, it's infantile to understand any text written by clearly above average intelligent individuals. Anyone who wrote a massive book such as the Bible or other ancient books, anyone who wrote such books at that in history were among the brightest people of their time. To think that they understood all these things literally is really arrogant, to be honest. It's very arrogant. And it shows a lot of ignorance on the part of the person saying, making such claims. Um, I'm not talking about, when I say arrogant, I really mean like academic scholars who make those claims, people who should know better, you know. But a regular person is really just ignorance. Like, they need to study the Bible in the original language. Hebrew is a very anthropomorphic language. Not only in reference to God, not only does it use figures of speech, a lot of metaphors in reference to God, but it uses it even in basic words of grammar. One of my favorite examples, and it's just one example of many, that basic words in Hebrew are very anthropomorphic, very weird if you translate it literally. So the word even though in Hebrew, af al pi, that's how you say even though. Af al pi. What is af? It's a nose. Al means over. Pi is my mouth. So when you want to say even though in Hebrew, you're literally saying, like, I want to have ice cream right now. Nose over my mouth. I just had a big meal. It's just it's a very literalist language, but you have to be a fool to take all these things literally. And I think a careful reading of the Bible shows that that is the way that the authors of the Bible understood it, figuratively, not literally. It says in the book of the prophet Hosea, there God speaks, saying, I spoke to the prophets in visions and using metaphor. It says it explicitly, and using metaphor. It says in the book of Deuteronomy, God says regarding the prophets that if he speaks to any prophet, that he's speaking to them in visions and in dreams and with metaphors. It says it explicitly. It's just so easy to, you just read one story about God's interacting with someone in the book of Genesis and you don't read the whole book. Yeah, you're going to have an infantile understanding of it. That's
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
We
absolutely.
could go on and on about this. There's many examples, but I will spare you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm trying to clear the pods of the questions. I'm making sure that I'm addressing these questions at least. If anybody wants to see the track,
There,
we are addressing these questions.
there are some people who would say that this understanding that these are figures of speech, not literal, they would say that this is all influence of Aristotelian, like Aristotle philosophy on the Jewish religion. But I'm here to say, if you read the text carefully in Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible, you will see that the text itself attests to the understanding that these things are figurative. And since when is something false just because someone else agrees with that opinion? Even if Aristotle happens to think something that aligns with the Jewish faith, that doesn't necessarily mean that we adopted it from Aristotle. Alphabets, writing systems began appearing all over the world, and roughly in the same amount of time. But we know that these could not all have been directly a result of interaction. Like, they were developing writing systems in the Middle East, as it appears Native Americans in the Americas and Central America were starting to write as well. And most people who have studied history know that there's not much evidence to assert that the people in the Middle East got their writing from the Indians in Central America, nor the Indians in Central America getting their writing from people in the Middle East. Uh, it's possible for there to be similarities without there being a direct connection. And yeah, I know that some people have far out theories, but there's just not much for it to stand on. My point is that similarity doesn't mean directly related connections. Like there are some commonalities we have with plants. It doesn't mean we necessarily came from a plant. There's some commonalities between this planet and some planets outside of this galaxy. That doesn't mean that our planet came from that other planet.
Unfortunately, the Christianity is missing the Hebrew, and they don't understand the Bible the way it should be understood.
As
And
well as secularist Jews. Some
secular,
secularist Jews who hate
of
their
course,
tradition do the same
yeah,
thing. They're,
same
I'm
thing.
Jewish. I can criticize my religion, even though it's not their religion. They hate it, and they
Yeah,
typically don't know crap. Like they come with an agenda. You know. Trust
it's
me. Anyone who knows
so.
me in depth, I'm not going to get
Mhm.
into that particular topic, but there are things about me that I will tell you I have all the reason in the world to reject traditional religion, to reject the Bible, if I wanted to. I have all the so if you want to put in the time, you can learn enough about me online to see what I'm talking about. There are things about me that should give me bias to reject the Bible. But what? But what? I don't think truth is determined by what I feel or my experiences. But in addition to that, also, uh, I've learned enough about the Bible to know that most of the claims made against it for being irrational or primitive are claims made by people who don't know what the heck they're talking about. And if you were to be like, if this is a scientist who's rejecting the Bible as being unscientific, if someone who has little to no knowledge of physics would come and start trying to debate with a scientist and say that he's wrong and he doesn't know what he's talking about when he talks about physics or the chemical interactions of certain substances, he would look at them like, "Who are you? Like are you so full of yourself? Are you so big-headed, arrogant that you think you know
Hmm.
more about, if you want to talk about science, first come and learn from physicists and chemists. Don't don't imagine, don't fool yourself into thinking that you even have the beginnings of a intellectual capacity to debate about physics with a physicist when you don't know the basics of physics. So also with a physicist who tries to debate about the Bible when he doesn't know the beginning steps of Hebrew, much less a broad acquaintance with the text.
Yeah, I was learning the. I mean, I was just watching the Kabbalah. I'm fascinated by Kabbalah, and I learned. I mean, I wanted to see how it is, and it is really phenomenal. That's what it happens in the other culture. They go deeper, like in Hinduism. I think that they took the pieces from here, and they're utilizing it. That's what I'm
There's the
my
statements. There's
yeah,
statements to that effect in Kabbalistic literature. There's some explicit statements where it
yeah.
talks about Rabbi so and so coming from India and bringing this teaching. It's
Hmm.
not even speculative.
Okay. So what I'm saying that today, I mean, like I was listening to these things. It, the Hebrew, the in depth, the intensity of the language, and how it's been, narrated in these chapters, especially even in chapter 1 in Genesis. It
Hmm.
says that the word Elohim appears 32 times.
Okay.
32 times. That means the manifestation of God in that one chapter in creation, he did it 32 times
Okay.
in that chapter itself. So, I mean, these type of information, you would never get in any other language until
Well,
unless if
I
you
think I missed the significance. What's the significance of it appearing 32 times?
there are some in-depth meaning to that one, plus 22 alphabets of Hebrew language, plus
Okay.
the 10 Sephiroth. So, like that's the calculation that they bring it up. And so if you together, uh, you know, the categories of probably the attributes, of God in that, plus the language is very important. Hebrew language is very important. 22 alphabets. That
And we
language
can
is great.
see how it would be easy for someone uh, who's taking a elementary approach to understanding these things if they're not if they don't have a good enough basic foundation. If they get ahead of themselves and prematurely try to learn these things, we can see how they could mistakenly come to the conclusion that things like the Sefirot or manifestations of God represent different powers, different
Hmm.
gods, and end up in idolatry, which is basically the mistake of idolatry,
Yeah.
mistaking the different interactions between God and the universe for being actually different gods, when really these are just different interactions of the one absolute reality in
Yeah.
different scenarios and circumstances, and people viewing it from different perspectives.
So, yeah, so that's one thing that I always, see that in Christianity they're really unfortunate. They didn't get to learn the Hebrew, and no one taught them. They didn't learn and study. If they would have done this one, things would have been so different than what they are right now. So, in that context, let me ask this question also, because we will have a couple of small questions I want to throw in. Um, that the one is Christians are waiting. We talked about the last one. Christians are waiting at least more than 2,000 years for the Messiah. So, as Jewish people, they're waiting more than them. Even they didn't accept
Yes.
Jesus Christ as the Messiah, so they're waiting more. So, so what I'm saying, uh, so what do you think that the right now the Bible as such it was compiled by Catholic,
The standard Western Bible, yes,
right?
containing the Jewish Bible plus the Christian sacred literature.
Yeah. So how about Tanakh?
So Tanakh is mostly parallel to the Christian Old Testament, but I would not say it's the same, because when Christians usually think of the Old Testament, they're not specifically thinking of these books in their original language. When Jews talk about Tanakh, we don't equate translations of Tanakh to the actual Tanakh, right? But they're in their original texts, they're the same as the original text of the Old Testament. So the difference between the Jewish view and the standard Christian view is that when Jews refer to Tanakh, we're thinking of basically the Old Testament in its original language, in its original form. Whereas when Christians usually think of it, they're thinking of it through the lens of translations, and they're not predominantly thinking of it in its original text.
Yeah, no, yeah, that part is clear. Yeah, I understand. But so
That
when
makes a
you
big difference.
so so when you the
You
Tanakh
were
is
asking
it
about the Messiah.
was that again?
You are asking something about the Messiah. I'm not sure I got the
Oh no
question.
no, and I said that like just I throw that thing about the Messiah. So in connection with that Messiah, I want to ask you because the Bible was compiled by Catholics for the
The
Christianity.
canon
So
it was
yeah,
decided by Catholic. Yeah,
the canons. At the same time, how about in Jewish Tanakh? Because sometimes you heard that Catholics still have some extra books
yeah, the
in
Apocrypha.
apocrypha books. They're there, but in Jewish, do we have any compiled book like Tanakh, like separately?
Yes,
Okay,
we have other books,
yeah,
and
that
some of which are older, possibly older than some parts of the Apocrypha, even. However, we should not consider these extra books in the way that Jews understand these books to be equivalent to the way that the Christian establishment regards the New Testament. Okay, so we do have other sacred literature, but from a Jewish perspective, sacred is not the same as saying infallible or directly from the mouth of God, the metaphorical mouth of God, right? we do believe if something comes directly from the metaphorical mouth of God, that it's sacred, no doubt. And that's a special type of holiness that's unparalleled, completely higher than anything else. But there are other texts which we do not believe came directly from God word for word, but we regard it as being sacred, holy, because the topics discussed in it are topics of holiness that relate back to the commandments of God, right? Or we believe that it's holy because they are teachings that came from the great sages of ancient Israel that God directly commanded us to heed their instructions. Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8 through 11, among several other passages. So we do have other texts, such as the Mechilta, the Sifra, the Sifre, the Tosefta, the Mishnah, the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Talmud Bavli. There are actually two types of Talmuds. Each Talmud
Mm-hmm.
has a subsection. All of these are sacred to Jewish tradition, and they're all extra biblical. Although they're extra biblical, they are intrinsically tied to the canon of the Hebrew Bible, because who decided the canon of the Hebrew Bible? Canon meaning the standard of what books are regarded as being holy enough to be part of the Hebrew Bible, aka Old Testament. Who decided that? The sages of the Talmud. We know that we include these books in the canon of the Hebrew Bible because the sages whose words are recorded in this, what we call rabbinic literature, they decided that, and we know they decided it from the rabbinic literature. So even though we don't consider the rabbinic literature equal to prophecy, but it is related to it. And we also don't believe they taught this. We don't believe that the canon represents all prophecy that was ever given. There were hundreds of other prophets who we believe were true prophets, and some of them definitely wrote down other texts. The Jewish canon of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, from a Jewish perspective, is not exclusive. It doesn't mean that we think these are the only revelations and prophecies God ever gave, but rather our sages decided, that these books of these particular prophets would be given a special status, not because they're the only ones that are true, but we gave them a special status in order to be extra careful to ensure that these books, these texts, would be preserved for generations to come, not because they're the only true prophecies, but because our sages understood, were of the opinion that these particular books of the Old Testament have extra benefit for future generations, have particular benefit for future generations. Whereas other prophets or prophecies, which we may have believed were true from true prophets, their prophecies, our sages didn't think were necessarily super relevant for all generations. Maybe they were only relevant for a specific community at a specific time, and that may have principles that are true, but it wasn't worth the extra effort to ensure the preservation of those books. So that's what makes the books of the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, special. Not that they're the only true ones, but that they have teachings that are relevant for all generations, that at least the sages thought the people of Israel really needed to hear and study. And you have to put a limit. The limit doesn't mean nothing else is valuable, but you have to put a limit, especially if you put your head in history. It's so easy to be anachronistic and viewing the ancient world from the perspective of the conveniences of modern man. They did not have the conveniences of having endless digital memory on their computers. They did not have the convenience, the luxury of a modern printing press. They didn't even have paper, for goodness sake. They had to write on sheepskin, right? Or cow skin. So, and this was extremely expensive. So you needed to limit the amount of books, not to the exclusion of the truth of other books, but you had to put a limit. There had to be something. And the debate between whether we should include book X or book Z or not, that didn't mean that they were necessarily debating about whether those that should be excluded are true or false. They're debating about, should we invest our very limited resources of sheepskin to writing this extra book or not, right? The whole perspective was completely different from what most modern people are thinking when they're thinking about these things, because they're not putting their head into the reality. They're not trying to have the perspective of the reality of ancient times, and that's a big mistake that a lot of people make. Uh, One final note: traditional Jewish understanding of the Hebrew Bible's canon, Old Testament canon, makes a very definitive black and white difference between the holiness of the other prophets and the holiness of the Torah, the law of Moses, on a completely different level of authority, despite the fact that we believe that they all come from revelation from God. But there's a difference between God's revelation as everlasting commandments and God's revelation of prophecies for certain events that will happen in the future or that happened back then,
Yeah,
right? Not all.
yeah, adding to your statement on the Tanakh, the one major thing that Christianity did is they arranged the books,
Yeah.
which is not correct because the way that they rearrange the books, it is not the way it is in the Tanakh.
Well,
So
even the arrangement, even the Jewish arrangement of the books in the Tanakh, even that arrangement was not in a codex form originally. Codex refers to what the form of books that we're familiar with today, like like this book. If you
yeah,
find an ancient book like this, they call this a codex. Whereas the word manuscript is more broad. A
mm,
manuscript is manu from hand, handwritten, but handwritten manuscripts could be in this form or in the form of a scroll. But the further back you go, you reach a point where codex forms, what we call book form, didn't exist. And there's not much evidence that Tanakh existed even among Jews in its current form as a codex, even back then. So they wouldn't even have had it in the Jewish form. Most of them would have been, well, they all would have been separate scrolls kept together.
yeah. I mean that's so yeah that is understandable, but certain things are kept in the last
There are
ages.
agendas. Of course, there are agendas.
Their agendas. That's why they are kept in there, and
Yeah,
then the New Testament is getting attached.
no doubt.
So
No doubt.
no doubt that. So,
There
so
are also differences in Christian canons. A lot of people think of the New Testament as one thing, but if you look at ancient manuscripts of popularly accepted New Testament books, you will see differences even in the order of some passages in those books in ancient manuscripts. You will see that some manuscripts of the New Testament lack certain books that today it's assumed are part of the New Testament, but there used to be debates about it. So some ancient manuscripts of the New Testament don't have certain books, but may have most of the other books. Some of them have all the same books, but lacking whole chapters, whole chapters. And there is still uh, other canons of the New Testament that are ancient canons of the New Testament that lack the book of Revelation. That was never part of their canon, and that include other books that Western Christians are completely usually unaware of, like the ancient Ethiopian Christian canon. That's not a
yeah.
modern cult inventing things. That's their
So
tradition.
yeah, I want to ask you the other day itself when you talk about the Ethiopians because they do not have the Revelation, Book of Revelation
Mhm.
in their Bible. So what
Traditional
they
Ethiopian
traditional.
Christians.
So what they think about the Messiah, it's just almost same like Jewish.
Well, I'm not an expert on their beliefs. I'm a little bit familiar. Sad to say, I'm probably a lot more familiar with their views than the average Westerner, but I'm definitely not an expert. I don't want to speak about that, but my impression is that they do have more or less a similar view as most Christians, but I don't know uh, to what extent it's developed. I really do not know. And it's not that it's impossible to know, it's just I'm not educated about it. But they also have other books that they highly esteem, that they highly value, that Western Christianity does not have. And I'm sure that has a lot of impact on their views. And with the internet today, we can learn a lot very quickly than that we not that we can know everything because there's still a lot of books that have not been translated to English or to Hebrew. So most of their books are written, most of their sacred literature is written in Ge'ez. Ge'ez is a classical language of Ethiopia.
Yeah. So
It's a Semitic language,
before.
by the way. It's related to Hebrew, by the way.
Oh, okay. So yeah, let's before we go, one more question for you. So this sometimes what they say, because we all knew that Hebrew and the Torah and Tanakh written in Hebrew, and whereas in the New Testament as the Christian Bible is written in Greek. So the assumption, or maybe the true, that what they say is that these were written by only the Jewish scholars in Greek, and because they were at the time, they were well versed with the Greek, and they were inspired by God, and they wrote in Greek. Uh, the question is, how come God can inspire you in two languages? Like, for one group, one language, and the it's totally different message in for different group. So, so how what are you thinking on that one? Writing in the Greek
Could you
language,
summarize this question into one or two sentences?
are the like um, are these texts, or are these books written by Jewish people? With God
What, the New
inspired?
Testament?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the basic question. I can, this is not, it's very easy to say Judaism teaches this, Judaism teaches that. But so long as we do not have a central authority of the Great Sanhedrin, the Beit Din HaGadol, right, which is referred to in the Torah again and again, as long as we don't have that centralized authority, there is no one absolute opinion on things which the Great Sanhedrin left no record of their opinion on. So I will just give you my opinion. It's not the opinion of the establishment Jewish, religious Jewish world, and really, I don't think even the establishment Jewish religious world has one definitive opinion because they also don't have a central authority. My opinion is that the majority of the Christian New Testament was is uh, a redaction and a highly edited version of texts and teachings from Jewish students of Jesus. And some of the books may possibly even have been uh, redactions, Christian redactions of Jewish literature that may not even have been from students of Jesus. There's a scholarly opinion about that regarding the book of Revelation, for example, that there's a lot of textual evidence that it may not even have been specifically a Christian text, but that they adopted it and then edited it. We don't need to get into all the details of that, but and I don't think that's the case with the majority of the Christian New Testament. I do think that the majority of it is authentic to the uh, early followers of Jesus, specifically Paul, mostly. But I would say together with that that it is highly redacted. I don't even think that. Um, I think that most of this is again, this is my opinion. I think that most of the problematic aspects of the New Testament, those parts of it with Jewish tradition, I don't think are authentic to the first disciples of Jesus. I really do not think that his. I don't think that Jesus created a new religion separate from Judaism, and I don't think he intended to. I don't even think he. It's very easy to demonize what we don't know, to vilify what we don't know. But from a historical perspective, yeah, the name Jesus might be associated with the atrocities of the early Catholic Church, which, by the way, and it's important to note, many Catholics have repented of. So we should not hold hatred against people alive today for things that they never did. Okay? Organizations and communities can change and they can improve. But it's a fact that the ancient Catholic Church did a lot of atrocities and they did a lot of these things in the name of Jesus. That doesn't mean that the historical Jesus uh, that the Gospels are based on advocated for any of these things. And I think it's the only people who can believe that he advocated for those things are people who are not familiar with what what the New Testament teaches. Even if some of those teachings are not authentic to Jesus, none of it justifies what the early Catholic Church did to Jews and to some other Christians as well. None of that is justified, even in the New Testament as it exists today. But I do think that it's a highly redacted, a highly edited and tampered with text. But the majority of its teachings, I think, are authentic, the core teachings. And I think that the Christian establishment does itself a big disservice by divorcing these teachings from the Jewish context in which it was given. And I'm not here referring to popular establishment Messianic Judaism either. I don't believe that represents, I'm not convinced. It's not just a matter of belief. I think there's very little evidence that even Messianic Judaism is representative of the authentic teachings of Jesus and his first disciples. There's also a lot of ancient evidence that they wrote books in Hebrew and Aramaic, testimony from the early Catholic Church fathers. There's also a lot of evidence that the early Catholic Church made effort to destroy these early Jewish communities who were descendants of the authentic Jewish followers of Jesus. They saw them as competitors and they made effort to destroy them. There's evidence of them murdering them, textual testimonies of murdering, early Catholic Church murdering Jewish believers in Jesus and writing about their beliefs. They wrote about their beliefs as well, and their beliefs were significantly different from the beliefs of the Christian establishment till today. So I think that, in summary, I think that Jesus viewed himself as potentially the Messiah. I think he probably had a more kosher, traditional Jewish understanding of Messiah than most Christians today do. And I think that's one of the reasons why, when he was put in a corner on a few occasions in the Gospels, and you see that they would try to ask him, "Who are you?" He kind of would try to skirt around the issue, because he probably had a more kosher understanding of Messiah, that it's not necessarily one individual, and that he may or may not have been the Messiah, and he wasn't sure, so he was being humble and not giving a definitive answer, as any upstanding kosher Jew would do. If it's not obvious to him that he's the Messiah yet, but he recognizes the potential, so why are you going to say yes or no? And if he failed, that doesn't mean that God is unfaithful. Unlike in Christianity, the traditional Jewish view of the Messiah is not that it's necessarily absolutely one individual person. Messiah originally just referred to the high priests of Israel, who were not kings, and they were descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses, from the tribe of Levi, not from the tribe of Judah. Jesus did not come from the tribe of Levi according to Christian tradition. Any other kind of Messiah is extra Torah, meaning it's not fundamentally based on the Torah. And only the Torah is the immutable command of God. There can be other types of Messiahs, but those are not direct commands of God. Okay? And there's more than one. There's no basis for thinking there's only one. If Jesus, as an educated Jew, spoke Hebrew, was familiar with the Hebrew Bible better than the Christian establishment is, better than most Jews are, he would well know that there's not only one Messiah. Perhaps he thought he could potentially be one of them.
Yeah,
and that wouldn't make him
we will talk about this Messiah subject
some
one
other
day
time.
completely. Yeah, but I don't know. We kind of sideboard on this one. So, but anyhow, I think we're going to wrap this one for today. It's been a long time right now, and it was nice. Fantastic.
My point here is that two things can be true at once. They do not necessarily contradict. It can be that the Jewish people have disagreements with Christianity, the Christian establishment, and we also don't think that Jesus is the absolute Messiah or the promised Messiah that we're waiting for. While at the same time, it can also be true that Jesus wasn't necessarily an evil person, and that there's great value in a number of the things he said, if understood in a historical, traditional Jewish context. But you take that out of the context, if you take it out of the Jewish context, it can become anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic. Just like with the arm of God in the Torah, if you take these figures of speech, these metaphors, out of the Jewish context, you can actually end up back in idolatry using the Torah.
I
That's
know.
what I'm saying. Two things can be true at once. So I don't think
Absolutely.
Jesus was necessarily evil, but that doesn't mean that I hold to Christianity.
Fantastic. Rabbi, it's so nice of you to answer all the questions, and these are very uh,
These are
you
juicy
know
questions.
very juicy because they should know about these things. That's why I'm keep on digging you in this type of a question. They should know what we're talking. For them, I want to expose this thing to them so that they'll know more, much better than ever before. At least they can have a idea about what we're talking here. So
A
that's why,
deeper grasp, yeah.
yeah, I don't want to go in. I mean, yeah, that's why I'm not even getting inside the so much of nitty gritties, comparing the words by words, and just let us clear all the peripheral thing, and then
We're
we'll
just
move it
giving a
on.
taste.
We'll give it a taste, and then we're going to move it on in the deep dive. So thank you so much for tonight, and it was really always it is pleasure to have you here. Thank you, Rabbi, and until we meet again, shalom, shalom,
V'bracha, Shavua
Shavua
tov,
tov, and
Birkat Hashem
Laila tov,
alecha,
Barakat Hashem, yeah, Laila tov.
Wa'al kol hasofim. Yalla bye.
Bye bye.